Make sure there's spaces in between the slats of wood so that the air and the fire can get through. All right, so it's a couple hours later. What we got going here, it is falling apart. Today I'm going to do a pit roast. It's my mom's birthday this weekend and she wants a roast, and I thought, what better a roast to do than a pit roast? So the idea with a pit roast is you've got a fire pit, you've dug a hole, and you've got, for this here I'm going to use one of these Dutch ovens. I got this one at Cabela's. I think I got it for like 60 bucks or something like that. Lasts the rest of your life, and these are pre-seasoned. So you get a big piece of meat that is like not an expensive piece of meat. I'm going to use a pork shoulder, and I'm going to show you how I put it in there with some onions and stuff like that. You get a big fire going, and on top of that fire you put a bunch of sort of baseball-sized rocks. And then once the fire's died down, you take some of the rocks out, you put the meat in the pot on the rocks, you put rocks on top of this, and then you cover the whole thing with dirt, and you leave it overnight. So it's like around 4 o'clock p.m., 4 p.m. And we're going to eat this tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. So 24 hours from now. I'm going to dig this out at 4 o'clock tomorrow, and it's still going to be hot. You can see you can see my breath, right? So it's, I don't know what it is, 5, 6, 7 degrees Celsius today, late March. So anyway, we're gonna get going here. I've already dug the hole out, and I'm using last year's Christmas trees, some cardboard boxes, and some wood I just have lying around. You know, the great thing about using this technique is that you don't need to have the best wood in the world, because it's not the wood that's cooking the food, it's the rocks, right? The wood is going to heat up the rocks, and all that energy is going to be stored in the rocks, and then slowly over time the rocks cook the food. But the food doesn't burn because there's no oxygen. You've buried it, right? So it's a really neat way of cooking. A little bit of work to set it up, but most of the good stuff is happening while you're doing something else, right? So let me get this fire going, and we'll check in with you a bit later on. All right, so you can see at this stage I've got something resembling a fire going, right? We had a lot of rain yesterday, so everything, basically the ground's wet. So I use that old Christmas tree just to sort of create a lot, evergreen boughs burn kind of intensely. So I just used it to burn off a lot of the moisture that was in the ground to sort of dry things out a bit. Now all the branches from the Christmas tree are gone. Now I'm burning the kindling and wood I had. You might want to ask, how many rocks do you need? Now you're using rocks, about fist-sized rocks, give or take. They don't have to be exactly that size. Right here, all of it, I've got little pieces of brick here, granite rocks, different kinds of rocks. Some kinds of rocks you have to be careful because they can explode. Anyway, you want about 3 times the volume of the pot, give or take, right? So if you get a pot that size, imagine 3 piles of rocks the same size as that. That should do it, right? That way you got enough for being underneath it, or on the sides and on the top, and that'll basically do it. So right now I've got the wood burning good, and now I'm going to start stacking the proper firewood on top, and then I'm going to basically set it up almost like a crib so that I can put the rocks on top of the wood. And then I'm going to go inside and make supper while all that burns down and the rocks get nice and hot. And then I'll come outside afterwards and have the meat. I'll show you how I prepare the meat and stick it in. Just 1,000 different ways to do it. You don't have to do it the way I do it, but put the pot in, put the rocks on using a shovel very carefully, and then cover it with the dirt. See, I dug the hole and all the dirt is in the wheelbarrow, right? And also, before I cover this with the dirt, just to make it easier for myself, I have a piece of metal I put over top of it. It's not absolutely necessary, but when you bury the pot, it can be hard to find it when you're digging it out, and because it's so hot, it's a bit, you know, dicey, sort of digging it out, right? This smoke's chasing me around here because I was too close to the fire. So it's handy to have something that's big enough to go over the pot, but small enough that you can completely bury it and basically, you know, get all the, I don't know why the fire's really chasing me today. Yeah, big enough that you can cover the pot, but small enough that you can still smother out the fire, because again, you don't want any fire in the pit. You want heat in the pit. You're heating up rocks, and the heat in the rocks is cooking the food over time without burning it because there's no oxygen. All right, so I'll show you the next stage when I get there. Okay, so now I've got a basic fire going. I've sort of done the crisscross lay. That's the sort of thing, you know, some logs going one way, some logs going the other way, some logs going the other way. That way you make a platform that you can stack rocks on. Make sure there's spaces in between the slats of wood so that the air and the fire can get through and the thing can breathe. I got rocks all around the edge, and even got a little bit of wood on top here. Okay, so I'm going to go inside for a couple hours and make supper and do all that sort of stuff, and hopefully when I come back out, this will all be burned down. There'll be a big pile of coals, and inside the coals there'll be all these rocks that are really, really hot. I've got faith in this wood because I know it's really, really dry because it's been indoors. If I was using, you know, a tree I just cut down or something like that, I'd have to nurse that tree into a really good fire. If you're using, you know, fresh cut wood, that sort of thing, you just don't know what you're getting. So I wouldn't be able to leave the fire with the confidence I'm leaving it with today. But today, I know I've got bone dry wood. It's been indoors. It's for more than 1 year, actually. I just noticed a stack of wood lying around and said, hey, I'm going to use that. So I don't have to mess around with this thing. But if you're using, you know, less reliable wood, you know, just some tree you just recently felled, depending on the type of wood, depending on how dry it is and all that sort of stuff, you might have to stay out and nurse the fire and maintain it and so on and so forth. But I think what we've got here, it should be okay. The rocks are sort of getting all the heat from the fire. This one could probably stand to be a bit closer to the action. But anyway, I think we'll have it. I think it'll be good. You can tell sometimes, you know, if you build a big enough fire, the rocks actually glow red when you do this. So, I mean, there's, you know, a fine balance between hot enough and too hot. You definitely don't want too hot. But anyway, I'm going to give this a couple hours, and we'll come back and see you then. Actually, just before I went inside, I added about 6 more pieces of wood. These are not bone dry, but I thought, why not just add a little bit more fuel. I don't know how well they'll burn, but they should dry off and burn eventually, so I thought it couldn't hurt to add a few more pieces of wood just to be sure that I had enough wood heat energy to get heat into the rocks. All right, so it's a couple hours later, and the fire is completely burned down. All the wood is, well, almost all the wood is gone, and all we've got is coals and hot rocks, and that's what we want. So now it's time to do the work and get in there and get the pot and the meat in the ground. So here's the pot I got here. All right, and all I've done to prepare the meat, pretty low tech. It's just, this is a pork shoulder, which is like one of the cheapest cuts of pork you can get. Even then, it costs about almost twice as much as it would have cost 3 years ago because of just crazy rising prices. But anyway, it's a pork shoulder. I took out the bone. I have that separately. I'm going to use that for a soup. So I'm getting basically one enormous meal. I mean, this is an impressive amount. This is almost like, what'd you call that? 4 liters. This is like a gallon of meat. 4 liters of meat, right? And that's with the bone and whatever meat's attached to the bone removed. You can use that for something else. So all I got is hunks of meat about the size of a fist, right? That way it's easy when you go to serve it. You just take them out with salt and pepper and onion. That's it, okay? And I've packed it, you know, I packed it in really tight, and you want that. You don't want to have air spaces in this. It's packed in really tight. The great thing about these pots here is that the lid is designed such that nothing goes in the pot, right? The lid overlaps, right? So nothing goes in the pot. All right, so now we got to get the rocks out, some of the rocks out, and make a hole to put the pot in. We'll put the pot in, and then we'll cover it with metal, and then the dirt. All right, so let's go. And the sun is almost below the horizon there, so we haven't got a lot of time to do this. Important at this stage to make sure the pot is as level as you can get it, so that stuff doesn't, slosh out. You just do that by eye. It should be okay. Unbelievable, I had the camera off for all of this. So the short version is that I put this metal over it and started shoveling on the dirt, and when I got all the dirt on, it was still not the case that there was enough dirt to cover the metal and cover off all the air pockets. So it wasn't airtight, and it's critical that when you bury this thing, it's airtight. So I took, I basically took the dirt back off, took the metal back off, and just buried the whole thing without the metal. It's a bit more irritating to have it that way. There's more variables because you don't know if the lid's on properly and all that sort of stuff. But that's more important than, it's so important to have it set up so that there's no air getting in there, because when there's no air getting in, you're in a situation where you've got all kinds of heat and no oxygen, so things can't burn. And inferior cuts of meat that are tough can have all this time to slow, long cook to build the flavor, to get everything working out right. I'm not going to touch this thing now for about 24 hours. It's about 7 p.m. Tomorrow, around 4 p.m., we'll dig this up, have a look at what we're dealing with. In my experience in the past, when you dig it up, it's still ridiculously hot in there. And the meat just has this incredible, long, slow cooked flavor that you really can't get any other way. So we'll see how it works out, and we'll see you tomorrow, all right? So see you in 24 hours. All right, so it's the next day, and it's around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I know I said I'd pull it out at 4 o'clock, but it rained and rained and rained all night, and I'm not sure if the rain actually, it's not that I'm worried the rain extinguished the fire, because we extinguished the fire when we put all the dirt on top. The idea is that the heat in the rocks does the cooking. My concern is that there was so much rain and so much water that it got through and cooled down the rocks and stopped the cooking. So given that it's around 2 o'clock, I can still put it in the oven and just let it continue to cook. But I put this little lid over the top. Hopefully that was enough to keep things from getting too wet and too cooled down. We'll see. Let's dig this up and see if there's any heat in there. Oh, what's that? Boy, things really cooled down. Okay, here's the lid. None of these rocks are hot. Everything should be hotter than this, at least in my experience. The trick is getting this out without getting sand and grit and stuff in the pot. These lids are designed not to let stuff in. So hopefully that's what we got going here. All right, I'll pop that out. I just want to feel down in here. Well, I mean, there's heat, but it's not super hot. Not as hot as I'd like. It definitely is not the kind of heat I'd like to feel in there. Let's clean this lid off and see what's going on with our meat. There's heat in the pot. But again, it's not so hot that I can't touch it. Well, a lot of fat came out of that. Well, I mean, it is, at least from what I can see, it is falling apart. I mean, it's cooked, it's falling apart. So, I guess there was enough heat in there to cook it. Because that is fall apart tender. Oh man, pork. I mean, a lot of liquid in there. That's just all the fat that came out. I'll take this out and put it on a tray. Baste this with its own fat. And you could eat it just like this, totally. I'm going to take it out, put it on a tray, baste it with its own fat, and just bake it in the oven for about 20 minutes just to get it nice and crunchy on the outside, that sort of thing, because all this liquid here is fat, because we used a shoulder cut. It's had a lot of fat in it. But everything is broken down, everything is tender. It's going to be a delicious meal. So for some people that might seem like a lot of work, but I mean, we basically cooked, I don't know what this is, I said a gallon, but maybe not that, but you know, a big, I mean, this is a big pot. It's a size 10 camp oven. It's full of meat. We cooked the whole thing. I came out here, I made a fire, I put some rocks on it. I went inside for a couple hours. Came back outside, dug a hole. I mean, I dug the hole first, right? I came outside, moved the rocks back, stuck the pot in, put the rocks back on, threw a bunch of dirt on top, and then I went to bed, right? And then I came out today around just after lunch, pulled it out of the hole. Everything's cooked. Everything is slow cooked. And I mean, the great thing about this approach is when you've got some sort of cheaper cut of meat that requires a long, slow cook, this is a good way to do it. I would like to try doing a kind of chili con carne this way. I think that would be fantastic, because you have the slow cook and you could buy, like, you know, chuck or something like that, you know, one of the tougher pieces of beef, because you're cooking it low and slow sort of thing for a long period of time. Right, this has been cooking for, what is that? So we put it in the ground about 7:30 last night. So that's 12 plus 5, 17, 18, 19 hours, right? I don't know when the heat subsided so much that it really wasn't making, I mean, basically it's not hot enough in here anymore. It's not really cooking, but it is warm. Basically, like, this is the temperature of the ground here, and the temperature of the meat is table ready right now, right? So it's easy. I mean, sure, you have to build a big fire and do all that sort of stuff, but it's an easy way to do a long, slow cook. And I mean, of course, you're not spending electricity or using propane or natural gas or whoever you run your stove inside. You know, we just use wood here, and you don't even need particularly excellent wood, because it's not the quality of the wood that matters, it's how much heat you can get stored up in the rocks. As long as you've got rocks and you can get those rocks hot, you can cook a meal this way. So it really does work. And I think it would be a lot hotter in the hole if we hadn't got that incredible rain last night. I mean, it was basically every time it rained, it woke me up. Really, really intense downpour. So my guess is that just the water got in there. It's porous, right? So the water got in there and it basically just drew the heat out of the rocks. That's my best guess, because it should be hotter in here, but it still worked anyway, so who cares? Anyway, so camp stove, where do you get it? Whether you get it at Cabela's or wherever, this is a great thing to use in your backyard. Of course, if you're going camping, you're camping under the back of a vehicle, you wouldn't want to carry this in a backpack, but if you're at a sort of permanent camp or camping under a vehicle, that sort of thing, and you can make a fire and stick something in the ground like this, this is a great way to make a big meal for a lot of people with really not a lot of work, because it's the time that's doing the work.